Beneath the sands of Iraq lie the shattered bones of cities that should not exist. Uruk, Eridu, Nippur, places that appear in history not as hesitant villages, but as complete civilizations, armed with writing, mathematics, astronomy, and law. No clumsy beginnings, no gradual climb, only sudden brilliance. How is it possible that humanity's first civilization rose from the dust already knowing how to be a civilization? What if the Sumerians were not inventors, but survivors, heirs to a world erased by fire, flood, and catastrophe? What if their tablets, their myths of gods who came down from heaven, were not fictions, but fragments of memory, messages from a lost age carried through the darkness of time? Tonight we step into that mystery, tracing floods that drowned continents, stones older than agriculture, and myths that may be coded warnings from another world. Together, we'll explore whether Sumer marked the dawn of civilization or the restart of humanity after its greatest reset. If these hidden stories captivate you, I invite you to subscribe so you never miss a journey into the forgotten past. And tell me, where are you listening from tonight, and do you believe Sumer was truly our beginning, or just our return? The desert wind sighs across the Iraqi plain, carrying grains of sand that sting the skin like memory itself. Here, where the rivers Tigris and Euphrates coil like silver snakes, humanity is said to have taken its first deliberate step into civilization. Under the unrelenting sun, the ruins of Uruk, Eridu, and Nippur lie in quiet disarray. Brick walls melted into the earth, ziggurats broken into ragged silhouettes, clay tablets scattered like fossilized thoughts. It is here, we are told, that human civilization began. But what if this was not a beginning? What if it was a return? The story of Sumer, as preserved in schoolbooks and museums, tells of nomadic tribes who settled fertile land and slowly, by the patient accidents of invention, discovered agriculture, architecture, and writing. Yet when archaeologists first brushed away the sand from Uruk, what they found was not the crude scratchings of a culture learning how to be human. They found precision, cities built to scale, writing systems fully formed, legal codes inscribed with confidence. It was as if the Sumerians already knew the rules of the game before they began to play. Consider Uruk, often called the first true city. By 3200 BCE, it housed perhaps 80,000 people, an astonishing number for its time. Its streets were laid in planned grids. Its temples rose in stepped platforms aligned to the cardinal points, and its workshops produced goods with industrial regularity. There were no trial-and-error villages leading up to this achievement, no broken line of half-forgotten attempts. Civilization arrived not as a stumbling child, but as a figure fully grown, striding onto history's stage. The Sumerians themselves seemed aware of this strangeness. In their myths, they spoke of the Anunnaki, those who came down from heaven. These were not spirits of rivers or winds, like the deities of many other cultures. They were described instead as bearers of knowledge, teaching how to build canals, how to write on clay, how to watch the stars. They carried with them the ME, cosmic decrees, or, as some scholars suggest, a kind of encoded curriculum. The Sumerians did not present themselves as inventors, but as inheritors. Archaeologists like Sir Leonard Woolley, digging in the 1920s at felt the dissonance. Beneath layers of soil, he uncovered streets paved with baked brick, drainage systems engineered with an understanding of hydraulics, and tablets cataloguing goods with the neat efficiency of an accountant's ledger. 6 feet below the surface, he expected disorder, experiments, failures. Instead, he found order, coherence, design. Civilization had not grown here like a tree. It had been replanted, already mature. The desert itself carries whispers of something older. At Shurapak, archaeologists discovered a flood layer, silt and clay deposited by a deluge around 2900 BCE, interrupting the continuity of settlement. Above this mud, cities reappear with startling sophistication. The Epic of Gilgamesh echoes this memory. Utnapishtim, warned of a coming flood, builds an ark to preserve life. The Atrahasis epic tells the same story. These were not just tales of divine anger. They were recollections of disruption, of the world washed clean, leaving only fragments to be pieced back together. And so a question drifts across the ruins. Was Sumer truly humanity's first civilization, or was it the restart after a great cataclysm? Did the tablets preserve instructions from a time before, their wedge-shaped marks like grooves in an ancient phonograph, carrying a voice from a forgotten world? Tonight, as you listen, imagine the desert wind slipping over broken walls, whispering across abandoned courtyards. Each grain of sand is a syllable, each ruin a fragment of a sentence. Together they form a story too vast to tell, yet impossible to silence. For if Sumer was a restart, then what came before? What world was erased, leaving only echoes in myth and mud? That question leads us into the floods, into the waters that once rose over the plains and perhaps reset the course of human history. The riverbeds of Mesopotamia gleam faintly beneath the moonlight, their waters dark and slow, as if they remember something we have forgotten. For thousands of years, the people who lived along the Tigris and Euphrates told stories of a flood, a wall of water that rose without warning, sweeping away cities, animals, and memory itself. It is a tale that does not belong to Sumer alone. From India to the Americas, from the mountains of Peru to the islands of Polynesia, civilizations whispered the same refrain. Once, the waters came, and the world began again. In Sumer, this memory survives in the Atrahasis epic. The gods, weary of humanity's noise, decide to drown them. But one man, Atrahasis, is chosen by the god Enki and told to build a great boat. He gathers animals, seeds, and craftsmen, sealing himself inside as the flood rages for days. When the waters recede, he opens a window to release birds, and finally steps onto dry land to begin the work of rebuilding. Millennia later, the Epic of Gilgamesh echoes the same tale through Utnapishtim, survivor of the deluge, who recounts the story to Gilgamesh as proof of humanity's fragility. The resonance of these tales with the biblical account of Noah is unmistakable. Scholars like Alexander Heidel have shown how the flood stories of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Israel intertwine, each borrowing imagery and structure from the other, each retelling the same deep memory, the sea swallowing the land. These were not isolated inventions. They were echoes carried across languages and epochs. Archaeology, too, confirms a watery disruption. At Shurapak, one of Sumer's earliest cities, excavators uncovered a thick band of silt, fine mud and clay deposited by floodwaters around 2900 BCE. Beneath it lie the remains of modest village life, simple homes, crude tools. Above it, the sudden complexity of advanced urban society. The line of mud is more than sediment. It is a dividing wall between two worlds, one erased, one reborn. And the Sumerian flood is only one verse in a global chorus. In Egypt, the tale of the shipwrecked sailor recalls a man cast upon an island where a serpent tells him of a flood that wiped away his kin. In India, the Satapatha Brahmana tells of Manu, warned by a fish to build a boat before the waters rise. In the Andes, Inca traditions speak of Viracocha sending a flood to cleanse the world, sparing only a handful who hid in caves. In Polynesia, chants recount how the god Tangaroa sent waves that covered the land, leaving only mountaintops visible. Even in North America, the Hopi remember a great flood from which their ancestors escaped by climbing into reeds. Such stories are striking not because they exist, but because they are everywhere. Mountains, islands, deserts. Each culture looks back to a time when the waters rose and when life began anew. To explain this, scholars often invoke the universality of floods. Rivers swell, storms devastate, seas encroach. Yet the uncanny similarity of detail, boats, chosen survivors, animals preserved, suggests more than coincidence. It suggests a shared memory of catastrophe, carried by survivors across the world. Geology adds another layer to this tapestry. Around 12,800 years ago, the Younger Dryas event unleashed chaos. Ice cores from Greenland record abrupt cooling, volcanic dust, and spikes in platinum, possibly from cometary debris. In North America, The retreat of the Laurentide ice sheet released torrents of meltwater, carving giant canyons, drowning vast tracts of land. Sea levels surged by hundreds of feet, submerging coastlines where early humans may have lived. If any advanced society had flourished before then, its cities would now lie beneath the waves, erased except for whispers in myth. Closer to Sumer's own time, localized floods also left scars. The Euphrates and Tigris, prone to seasonal flooding, could transform overnight into raging seas. Clay layers at Ur and Kish show interruptions, sudden breaks that suggest inundation. To a people who lived on floodplains, such events were not natural disasters, but existential resets. Each flood became a reminder of the fragility of order, of how quickly water could reclaim the land. The Sumerians responded with architecture as memory. Their ziggurats rose like artificial mountains, echoing the shape of hills that survived floods. Their myths placed wisdom in the hands of gods who instructed chosen survivors, embedding in story the lesson that survival depends on foresight. Their clay tablets, hardened by accident in the fires of conquest, became vessels of continuity, like arks of knowledge against the sea of forgetting. Imagine standing on the floodplain at Shuruppak, your feet sinking into soil once churned by catastrophic waters. Imagine the silence after the storm, survivors staring at a horizon emptied of homes, temples, and fields. Out of that silence came determination. They carved tablets, raised walls, and rebuilt their lives with an urgency born from loss. Civilization perhaps did not begin in Sumer. It was restarted there, with the memory of catastrophe embedded in every myth, every law, every brick. The flood, then, is not merely allegory. It is memory encoded in story, geology, and ruins. It is the hinge on which the wheel of civilization turned. From its waters, Sumer rose, carrying fragments of what came before. But if the flood represents erasure, what of the older sites that predate even agriculture? Stones that were raised before Sumer, then buried deliberately as if to protect them from the same fate. For answers, we must journey north to the hills of Turkey, where Göbekli Tepe waits beneath its covering of earth, older than cities, older than the plough, and perhaps older than the flood itself. The sun rises slowly over the hills of southeastern Turkey, gilding the landscape with a light that reveals little and conceals much. Among the low ridges and fields stands a mound known to local shepherds as Göbekli Tepe, the navel of the hill. For centuries it seemed no different from the many tumuli scattered across Anatolia. Yet beneath this hill lies a secret older than Sumer, older even than agriculture itself. In 1994, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began to dig. What emerged from the soil was unlike anything the world had seen. Massive T-shaped pillars of limestone, some 18 feet tall and weighing more than 20 tons, arranged in great circles. The stones were carved with animals, foxes leaping across the surface, vultures spreading their wings, scorpions crawling in relief. This was not the work of simple hunter-gatherers. It was monumental architecture, millennia before the invention of the wheel, millennia before the rise of cities in Mesopotamia. Radiocarbon dating placed the earliest enclosures at around 9,600 BCE, 7,000 years before Sumer. The discovery overturned the conventional narrative that agriculture came first, giving rise to settlements, temples, and civilization. Instead, here was a temple complex built before farming, as if religion, cosmology, or knowledge itself had preceded the domestication of crops. Göbekli Tepe was not supposed to exist, and yet it does, its pillars rising like a chorus of forgotten voices. What makes the site more haunting is its deliberate burial. Around 8,000 BCE, the enclosures were carefully filled in with soil and debris, preserved as if against time itself. This was no collapse or abandonment. It was an act of concealment, perhaps of protection. The builders seemed to know the world was changing, that a deluge of history might wash away their memory. So they buried their wisdom in stone. Among the carvings is one particularly enigmatic slab known as the vulture stone. Scholars like Martin Sweatman and Dimitrios Tsikritsis have argued that its symbols may represent constellations, recording a cosmic event, the impact of a comet swarm around 10,150 BCE that triggered the Younger Dryas, a period of sudden cooling and floods. If true, Göbekli Tepe is more than a temple. It is a memorial, a record of catastrophe encoded in stone, linking myth with geology. The scorpion may represent Scorpio, the vulture a constellation overhead, the sphere a fragment of fire streaking across the sky. The pillars themselves resemble stylized human forms, arms folded along their sides, belts and loincloths carved in detail. These are not abstract totems but figures, guardians of memory. Some researchers suggest they depict ancestors or teachers, those who guided humanity through the darkness after the flood. To the later Sumerians, such teachers were the Anunnaki. Could Göbekli Tepe have been their earlier classroom, a site where skywatchers recorded both stars and disasters, preserving them for those who would come after? Other anomalies deepen the mystery. The sheer logistics of quarrying, carving, and moving stones of this size challenge assumptions about what hunter-gatherers could achieve. Without wheels, beasts of burden, or metallurgy, how did they maneuver 20-ton pillars? Experimental archaeology shows it is possible with ropes, sledges, and human labour, but the precision of the circles, the artistry of the carvings, and the scale of the undertaking suggest planning beyond subsistence survival. These builders had time to spare, knowledge to encode, and motives that stretched beyond survival. The burial of Göbekli Tepe remains one of its greatest enigmas. Was it hidden from invaders? Protected from cosmic forces? Or was it part of a ritual cycle, sealing away one age as another began? The soil used to fill the enclosures was not random debris, but carefully chosen material, as though the act of covering was as important as the act of building. Schmidt often spoke of it as a time capsule, deliberately created for us, or for survivors of another catastrophe, to rediscover. The significance of Göbekli Tepe ripples outward. It suggests that complex organization, symbolic thought, and monumental construction did not arise from farming. They preceded it. Perhaps agriculture itself was adopted not out of necessity, but as a means to sustain a culture already invested in cosmology and memory. In this reading, Göbekli Tepe is less a product of the Neolithic revolution and more its cause. A temple did not follow farming, farming followed the temple. The parallels to Sumer are striking. Both cultures seem obsessed with preservation. Göbekli Tepe through burial, Sumer through clay tablets baked to endure. Both appear without precursors. No simple shrines before Göbekli, no crude proto-cities before Uruk. And both carry echoes of catastrophe. The Younger Dryas for Göbekli, the Mesopotamian flood for Sumer. It is as though humanity, shattered by repeated cataclysms, sought at intervals to rebuild, to restart, to reinscribe the forgotten laws of civilization. Imagine walking through Göbekli Tepe today, the morning light throwing long shadows across the pillars. The animals carved into their surfaces seem to move as you pass, foxes darting, snakes coiling, vultures lifting into the air. It is a silent bestiary from a forgotten world. But the silence is not empty. It is charged, as though waiting for us to remember what has been lost. The site feels less like a ruin and more like a conversation, one side preserved in stone, the other waiting for us to answer. From these buried stones rises the question that leads us forward. If Göbekli Tepe could emerge without precedent, then vanish deliberately beneath earth, might Sumer's sudden cities not be the first, but the latest echo of this deeper pattern? The answer may lie not in what we find above ground, but in what is conspicuously absent beneath the cities of Mesopotamia. The heat of the Mesopotamian afternoon presses against the earth like a heavy hand. Archaeologists, kneeling in shallow trenches, brush dust from ancient bricks, expecting to peel back layer after layer of human trial and error. Huts giving way to villages, villages to towns, towns to cities. That is the rhythm of history we are taught to expect. Progress slow and stumbling, like a child learning to walk. But beneath the cities of Sumer, that rhythm falters. The layers of failure, the fragile beginnings, are missing. At Uruk, the so-called first true city, the story begins not with crude huts, but with monumental walls stretching 6 miles in circumference, as if drawn by a master planner. Irrigation canals cut with technical precision fed fields that sprawled for miles. Tablets record shipments of grain tallied in neat columns, contracts inscribed with the authority of bureaucrats who seem to know exactly how to govern. Where are the prototypes, the collapsed experiments, the messy learning curves? They are not there. Uruk does not crawl into being. It arrives like a sudden dawn. The same is true at Eridu, a city Sumerians themselves called the first. Excavations revealed a sequence of temples built atop one another, 17 layers in all, spanning centuries. Yet even in its earliest stratum, the temple shows planning, symmetry, alignment to the cardinal points. There is no fumbling. From the first, it is deliberate, structured, confident. Nippur, the spiritual heart of Sumer, offers a similar puzzle. Excavations show advanced temple architecture in its earliest phases, complete with drainage systems and baked brick construction. Even at Telbrak further north, the so-called Eye Temple appears suddenly with iconography and architectural sophistication. Across the region, the earliest levels that should show transition from simple subsistence to structured urban life are either absent or already polished. Dr. Harriet Crawford of Cambridge noted this peculiarity in the 1980s. Sumer's earlier strata look like the work of mature societies, not beginners. By contrast, in Egypt, the pre-dynastic villages of mud and reed gradually evolve into stone monuments. In China, Neolithic settlements slowly accrete complexity until the Shang dynasty. But in Sumer, the ground beneath the cities is silent. The missing layers motif troubles archaeologists because it hints at something erased or transplanted. The silence is more unsettling when we compare timelines. If humanity was stumbling towards civilization, we would expect to see half-built attempts scattered across Mesopotamia, villages experimenting with walls, shrines growing gradually into temples, crude marks inching toward writing. But instead, when the curtain lifts, the play is already underway. It is as if a script had been handed to the Sumerians, complete with stage directions. This absence is not just physical, but cultural. Writing appears full-fledged, as we shall see, without crude transitional forms. Mathematics arrives in a system elegant enough to endure 5,000 years. Astronomy begins with accuracy that should have taken centuries to refine. Each of these systems seems imported, as if carried into Mesopotamia from somewhere else. Excavators have occasionally found hints that deepen the mystery rather than resolve it. At Sir Leonard Woolley uncovered layers of silt consistent with flooding, directly beneath sophisticated city remains. Beneath that silt lay only rudimentary village structures, with nothing in between to explain the leap from huts to ziggurats. In other words, flood, silence, then civilization. It is tempting to read the silence beneath Sumer as absence, but silence can also be erasure. Some scholars, like Dr. John Brennan, excavating at Eridu in 2018, describe the lowest layers as surgically clean, as if the traces of earlier settlements had been swept away. Was this the work of natural floods? Or did the Sumerians themselves sense they were building on the ruins of something older, something they chose not to acknowledge? Myth, as always, offers a mirror. The Sumerians told of a great flood that destroyed a previous order, leaving only one survivor, Ziusudra, to carry the seeds of knowledge forward. After the waters receded, cities were rebuilt with startling speed, as though memory guided the hands of the builders. The absence beneath the cities may not signal nothingness, but the scar of that erasure, the gap left when an earlier world was washed away. Other cultures echo the same pattern. In Egypt, the myth of Zep Tepi, the first time, speaks of gods who established order after chaos, as if a reset had occurred. In Mesoamerica, the Five Suns myth describes repeated destructions and restarts, with humanity recreated again and again. Sumer's missing layers are not an anomaly, but part of a larger motif. Civilizations do not emerge once, but repeatedly, each time standing on invisible ruins. Imagine kneeling at an excavation trench in Ur, brushing away soil to find not fragile huts, but sturdy foundations aligned to the stars. Imagine the disquiet. History is supposed to show steps, but here it shows a leap. The silence beneath is not empty, it is eloquent. It whispers that we are looking at a restart, not a beginning. This paradox beckons us deeper, into the very symbols pressed into clay. For if the soil beneath the cities is mute, the tablets that lie within them speak loudly. Yet what they say is no less unsettling. The birth of writing itself, in Sumer, looks less like invention and more like recollection. In the dim light of a museum archive, rows of clay tablets lie silent, their wedge-shaped impressions frozen for more than 5,000 years. Each mark was once made by a reed stylus pressed into soft clay, then left to harden under the Mesopotamian sun. These tablets speak in the voice of the Sumerians, but the first thing they tell us is paradoxical. Their language and their writing system did not crawl from infancy. They arrived mature, complex, and complete, as though remembered rather than invented. Most writing systems bear traces of their evolution. Egyptian hieroglyphs can be traced back to pictographs scratched on pottery. Chinese characters descend from the oracle bones of the Shang dynasty, their earliest forms rough and tentative. Even the Mayan script, though elaborate, shows experimental steps in its development. In contrast, Sumerian cuneiform, appearing around 3200 BCE, emerges already standardized, capable of recording legal contracts, mathematical equations, hymns, and even epic poetry. Its grammar is intricate, its vocabulary extensive, its syntax precise. There are no clumsy half-steps, no crude scrawls groping toward literacy. From the very first tablets, the Sumerians wrote with the confidence of scribes who had been trained for centuries. Dr. Samuel Noah Kramer, one of the great pioneers of Sumerology, noted this in the mid-20th century. Working in the archives of the University of Pennsylvania, he traced line after line of early cuneiform. What unsettled him was its polish. Languages and scripts usually leave behind a trail of mistakes, protoforms, experiments, and abandoned symbols. Cuneiform did not. It was as if the Sumerians had unrolled a manual, ready-made, and simply begun to inscribe. The tablets themselves reinforce this sense of inheritance. One, catalogued as UM 1927-18, records a grain transaction, each column neat as though copied from a template. Another lists astronomical observations, noting the movements of Venus with a precision still admired today. Still others contain myths of Enki, the god of wisdom, distributing the ME, those divine decrees or principles that governed civilization. Writing in these stories is not invention but a gift. Enki bestows it upon humanity so that knowledge will not be lost. Could it be that cuneiform was not humanity's first writing system, but humanity's first reconstruction of a system already known? Scholars like Denise Schmant-Besserat have pointed to earlier clay tokens, simple counters for livestock or grain, that might have evolved into script. But the leap from tokens to full grammar is too great, too sudden. There should have been intermediate steps, but they are absent, like the missing layers beneath Sumer's cities. The abruptness of cuneiform's appearance raises another question. Why clay? Why not wood, papyrus, or hide? Clay is heavy, awkward, and easily broken, yet its durability is unmatched. Once fired, intentionally or by accident, clay tablets can survive millennia. When Nineveh burned in 612 BCE, the flames turned its library into a kiln, preserving the tablets rather than destroying them. The Sumerians, consciously or not, chose a medium that could endure catastrophe. It is tempting to think they knew disasters were inevitable and that memory had to be pressed into earth itself to survive. The act of writing itself carried ritual power. A scribe sat cross-legged, stylus in hand, clay on a wooden board. Each impression was deliberate, each wedge carrying meaning. The angular script mirrored the rhythms of their world: irrigation canals, measured fields, celestial cycles. Writing was not just recording, it was aligning human order with cosmic order. To inscribe was to anchor knowledge in permanence, to resist the flood of forgetting. And the content of these writings reinforces the sense of continuity. The Sumerians recorded contracts, but also hymns, myths, and epic poetry. The Kesh Temple hymn, one of the earliest known, praises a temple as if it were a cosmic axis, a place where heaven and earth meet. Such hymns suggest memory of older traditions, structures built before the flood, or temples that mirrored Göbekli Tepe's cosmic alignments. In the instructions of Shurupak, a wisdom text, we find proverbs nearly identical to those in later Hebrew literature. Do not speak arrogantly to your mother. Do not buy an ass whose bray is loud. Continuity of thought flows across thousands of years, as if the words themselves were heirlooms passed down. The precision of cuneiform extended into administration. Tablets from Uruk detail rations for workers, allotments of beer, and deliveries of wool, each recorded with exact numbers. Others preserve mathematical exercises, teaching multiplication tables, reciprocals, and even geometric principles. These were not the halting steps of a people learning to count, they were the structured lessons of a culture already accustomed to calculation. The mythic connection reinforces this interpretation. In the Enmerkar and the Lord of Aratta epic, writing itself is described as an invention of desperation. Enmerkar, king of Uruk, can no longer remember a long message and invents writing to preserve it. But the story is playful, even ironic. Its real lesson may be that writing is a gift from the gods, a tool given rather than discovered. To a culture aware of its fragility after floods and wars, writing was a divine safeguard, an ark of clay. Imagine holding one of these tablets in your hand. Heavy, cool, the wedges sharp despite the passing of 5 millennia. You feel its weight not only in matter but in meaning. This is no experiment. It is an inheritance, a deliberate act of preservation. Each stroke of the stylus whispers, remember, rebuild, endure. And so the birth of writing in Sumer looks less like invention and more like recollection. The wedge-shaped script is not the first word humanity ever spoke, but perhaps the first word humanity pressed back into permanence after forgetting. It is survival etched in clay. The question then is what those first inscribed instructions contained. Words gave way to numbers, numbers to laws, laws to equations. To see how far this inheritance extended, we must turn from language to mathematics, from stories to symbols that shaped time itself. The Sumerians did not just write. They calculated with elegance and sophistication, as though guided by teachers from a deeper past. Night falls over Mesopotamia, and the vault of the sky glitters with stars. Long before telescopes or compasses, Sumerian scribes sat beneath this same sky and pressed numbers into clay. Their system was unlike any other. Where most cultures counted with fingers and toes, base 10 or base 20, the Sumerians chose base 60, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. These are their gifts to us, still woven into our modern timekeeping and geometry. But why 60? Base 60 is not intuitive to the human body. It is not the product of casual counting. It is a mathematician's system, chosen for its divisibility, by 2, 3, 4, 5, and beyond. It is a framework designed for complexity, for astronomy, for engineering. To stumble upon such a system at the dawn of civilization is like finding a computer program running on the very first attempt at coding. It suggests inheritance. One clay tablet, known as YBC 7289, held in Yale's Babylonian collection, shows this inheritance in startling clarity. Inscribed around 1800 BCE, but derived from older traditions, it depicts a square with its diagonal labelled by a number that represents the square root of 2. The accuracy of the calculation, correct to 6 decimal places, rivals modern precision. 1,000 years before Pythagoras, the Sumerians were demonstrating his theorem in clay. Another tablet, Plimpton 322, discovered in Iraq in the early 20th century, lists what appear to be Pythagorean triples. Whole numbers satisfying the relationship A2 plus B2 Franbas C2. Mathematician Eleanor Robson argued that it represents a trigonometric table, the oldest known in the world. Imagine that, a trigonometric table existing 2 millennia before the Greeks invented trigonometry. Astronomy too reveals their mastery. The Venus tablet of Amisaduqa, a Babylonian text rooted in Sumerian tradition, records the planet's appearances over a 21-year cycle. Modern analysis shows its data to be precise, suggesting careful, long-term observation. And it was not alone. Star catalogues such as MUL, APIN show systematic records of constellations, risings, and planetary motions, organized with the regularity of scientific tables. This was not casual stargazing, it was institutionalized knowledge. Even the very shape of their mathematics suggests sophistication. Cuneiform tablets reveal the Sumerians used sexagesimal fractions, enabling them to calculate reciprocals and handle complex divisions with ease. They recorded solutions to quadratic and cubic equations, and some tablets even approach concepts we would recognize as compound interest. In a tablet now housed in the Louvre, a problem about loaning barley at interest unfolds into neat calculations that echo modern financial systems. These were not primitive minds scratching tallies in dirt. These were engineers of abstraction, handling numbers with fluidity. Their obsession with ratios permeated architecture as well. Archaeologists have noted that the bricks of Sumerian temples were molded to standard dimensions, expressed in sexagesimal ratios. The Ziggurats, those great stairways to heaven, reflect not only cosmology but mathematics in their very proportions. Step heights, terrace dimensions, and orientations mirror numerical harmonies that anticipate later Greek fascination with sacred geometry. How did this arise? If Sumer had truly been the first civilization, one might expect mathematics to begin with crude counts, marks for sheep, not square roots. Yet the earliest tablets show a system already versatile enough to handle trade, astronomy, and geometry. As with writing, the missing steps provoke unease. Were the Sumerians recovering knowledge from an earlier culture, one washed away by catastrophe but remembered in fragments? The myths again hint at this. Enki, the god of wisdom, is not merely a storyteller but a teacher, distributing the ME of measurement, of number, of construction. In these tales, mathematics is not invented but bestowed. The gods hand it down as instruction manuals for civilization, encoding the rhythm of the cosmos into human society. Imagine standing on a ziggurat as twilight deepens. A priest astronomer raises his eyes to Venus gleaming just above the horizon, then lowers his stylus to mark its position in clay. Around him, apprentices recite multiplication tables, their voices rising like chants into the cooling air. Nearby, merchants tally barley rations with the same symbols, while surveyors measure fields by stretching chords and inscribing results. In Sumer, mathematics was not confined to scholars. It was life itself, a language through which cosmos, commerce, and construction all spoke at once. Modern echoes remind us of this inheritance. Every time we glance at a clock face divided into 12 hours, or calculate a circle in degrees, we unknowingly repeat Sumerian habits. Our GPS satellites, aligning their signals, rely on sexagesimal divisions of time. Astronomers still divide celestial spheres into degrees that descend from those ancient scribes. Their system has not vanished. It has merely become invisible, woven into the way we perceive order itself. And yet the sophistication of Sumerian mathematics also underscores fragility. For centuries after Sumer's fall, much of this knowledge was forgotten, rediscovered piecemeal by Greeks, Arabs, and modern scholars. That a culture could master square roots to 6 decimals and then vanish into silence is a sobering reminder of how easily brilliance can be lost. Like writing, Sumer's mathematics feels less like invention and more like recovery, a retrieval of tools from a forgotten past. The precision of their numbers, the elegance of their ratios, the durability of their system all whisper of teachers unseen, of a lineage of engineers whose memory flickers through clay. But who were these forgotten teachers, these bearers of numbers and laws? The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki, those who came down from heaven. Were they gods, ancestors, or something stranger? To answer, we must step from numbers into myth, where sky beings descend to shape the destiny of humankind. The desert night is never truly silent. Beyond the chirp of insects and the distant call of owls, there is the sky itself, a vast canvas of stars, whispering with light older than humanity. For the Sumerians, these stars were not distant fires. They were doorways, homes, and markers for those who came down from heaven, the Anunnaki. In the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic rooted in older Sumerian traditions, the Anunnaki are described as divine architects, ordering chaos and setting the framework of the cosmos. They are not vague deities of wind or storm, but purposeful figures who divide realms, establish laws, and assign duties. In the myth Enki and the world order, the god of wisdom travels from city to city, bestowing roles, canal building in one place, astronomical observation in another. The details sound less like hymns and more like instructions, a curriculum disguised in the robes of myth. But who or what were these figures? To some they were simply gods, born from human imagination, embodying awe before natural forces. To others, like Zecharia Sitchin, they were extraterrestrial visitors from a distant planet called Nibiru, orbiting on a 3,600-year cycle, descending to Earth to mine resources, and in the process teaching humans the arts of civilization. Still others have offered subtler theories. Perhaps the Anunnaki were descendants of a prior human civilization, survivors of an earlier cataclysm who preserved fragments of knowledge and reintroduced them after the flood. The ambiguity allows the myth to function both as metaphor and as possible memory. The Sumerians were not alone in remembering sky teachers. Across the globe, myths echo with the same refrain. The Dogon people of West Africa speak of the Nomo, amphibious beings who descended from Sirius and imparted astronomical knowledge. Knowledge curiously precise, including details about Sirius B, a star invisible without modern instruments. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, arrived bringing mathematics, astronomy, and agriculture before vanishing eastward across the sea. Polynesian chants recall Tangaroa descending with the wisdom of navigation, teaching how to follow stars across the open ocean. In ancient China, the sons of heaven bestowed the mandate of heaven, linking rulers with cosmic order. Different lands, different languages, but the same motif. Knowledge descends from above. Archaeological curiosities deepen the intrigue. The cylinder seal, VA243, housed in the Vorderasiatisches Museum in Berlin, shows a central star surrounded by 11 smaller spheres. Mainstream scholars see only symbolic representations of deities. Alternative interpreters argue it depicts the solar system, with the planets orbiting the sun, knowledge supposedly unattainable until the Renaissance. Whether coincidence or not, the detail sparks a question. How did a culture we are told was barely emerging from prehistory imagine such a thing? Even the Sumerian king list hints at something extraordinary. It claims kingship descended from heaven before the flood, with rulers reigning for tens of thousands of years. Mainstream historians dismiss these reigns as mythic exaggerations. Yet what if they encode something else? Astronomical cycles, or dynasties remembered as singular figures. If taken symbolically, they may point to epochs of stability before cataclysm. If taken literally, they suggest beings of extraordinary longevity. The Anunnaki myths often emphasize teaching and transmission rather than domination. Enki does not merely create, he instructs. In the story of Adapa, sometimes called the Sumerian Adam, the sage is granted wisdom but denied immortality. Here again, the gods are not simply rulers, but curators of knowledge, doling out fragments to ensure humanity's survival while keeping certain secrets veiled. It is as though they sought to restart civilization without restoring it fully to its former height. Imagine a Sumerian priest standing atop a ziggurat at dawn. The sky blushes with light, and as Venus rises, he whispers prayers not only to a god, but to a remembered teacher. His stylus scratches into clay, recording ratios, decrees, and omens. Behind the ritual lingers the memory that these instructions were once given by luminous beings descending in fiery chariots. For the community below, they are gods. For us, they may be guardians of lost knowledge. The ambiguity of the Anunnaki serves a function. If they were myth, they remind us of humanity's hunger to connect the heavens with earthly order. If they were memory, they point to a forgotten age when knowledge was more advanced than we assume. If they were something stranger, beings from elsewhere, their legacy lies not in their identity, but in the enduring structures and stories they left behind. And these structures are not limited to myths or seals. They rise in brick and stone, in the very fabric of cities like Uruk, Eridu, and Nippur. For if the Anunnaki bestowed the blueprint, it should appear in the foundations themselves, in streets laid out with precision, in temples aligned to the stars, in cities born not tentatively but complete. The desert morning is pale and gold, the air heavy with heat even before the sun has climbed high. From a distance, the ruins of Uruk and Eridu seem like little more than eroded mounds of clay. Yet once, these places were alive with noise, the sound of carts rolling through straight avenues, priests chanting at ziggurats, merchants calling out prices in bustling markets. What startles archaeologists is not merely that these were among the world's first cities, but that they appeared already knowing how to be cities. In most parts of the world, the growth of urban life is gradual. Villages cluster near rivers, huts grow into hamlets, hamlets into towns. The archaeological record preserves the stumbles, crooked alleys, collapsed walls, failed experiments in irrigation. In Sumer, by contrast, the first true layers of civilization already bear the hallmarks of maturity. Consider Uruk around 3200 BCE. Behind its 6-mile circuit of defensive walls, housing perhaps 80,000 people, the city was laid out with deliberate planning. Residential districts separated from temple compounds, canals cut with geometric precision, workshops organised for textile production and metallurgy. Sir Leonard Woolley, excavating in the early 20th century, described the infrastructure as so advanced it could have served a modern municipality. This was not a hesitant attempt at urban life. It was urban life executed with confidence. Eridu tells a similar story. Long regarded by Sumerians as the first city, Eridu grew around a temple to Enki, the god of wisdom. Excavations reveal 17 successive temples built on the same spot, each one larger, more complex, but even the earliest show careful symmetry and alignment. Archaeologists expected crude shrines. They found proportioned sanctuaries aligned to the cardinal points, built with an understanding of weight distribution and foundation depth. It was as though the builders carried a blueprint already perfected. Nippur, too, bears this signature. It was less a political capital than a spiritual hub, yet its ziggurat and temple complex reveal engineering mastery from the start. Drainage channels, brick ratios, staircases oriented to celestial risings. Each detail suggests builders who were following an established template, not experimenting. Other cities echo the same pattern. Lagash, Umma, and Shurapak all show evidence of sudden organization, standardized bricks, streets oriented with consistency, irrigation systems integrated into city planning. The impression is of a civilization beginning mid-sentence, as if copying from instructions remembered rather than inventing anew. This sudden coherence is reinforced by administration. The earliest tablets from Uruk do not show tentative attempts at record-keeping, but structured bureaucracies, lists of workers, rations of beer, inventories of livestock. The use of seals, contracts and receipts appears as though bureaucracy had been in place for centuries before being written down. Even taxation, often regarded as a later development, appears almost immediately. Civilization emerged not only with temples and walls, but with government. Why did this happen here, in this way? Some historians suggest environmental pressures. The fertile floodplains of Mesopotamia demanded large-scale irrigation, which required cooperation, planning, and leadership. Yet even this does not explain the sophistication of the earliest phases. Irrigation canals at Uruk were laid with angles that suggest surveying skill, and fields were measured in standard units, echoing the sexagesimal mathematics already in use. These are not the fingerprints of a society just learning. They are the marks of one remembering. Myths, as ever, offer reflection. The Sumerian king list insists that kingship descended from heaven after the flood, a phrase that suggests authority and structure were not invented but restored. The gods, according to the texts, assigned each city its role: Eridu for wisdom, Nippur for religion, Uruk for kingship. This division of functions mirrors how the cities themselves operated, as though a divine or ancestral blueprint dictated their rise. Imagine standing on a street in Uruk at its height. The buildings rise in ordered rows, markets hum with exchange, priests ascend stairways that gleam in the morning light. Children run along straight avenues, their laughter mingling with the calls of merchants. And all of it, from the drainage underfoot to the ziggurat on the horizon, feels less like the first attempt of a young culture and more like the reawakening of one that already knew what it was doing. The idea of cities born complete unsettles conventional timelines. It suggests that Sumer was not an isolated miracle, but part of a cycle: catastrophe, survival, restart. Survivors of floods may have carried with them the templates of lost worlds, re-establishing them in clay and brick. This would explain the uncanny maturity of Sumer's earlier cities, the missing steps replaced by memory. If the cities were planned, the plan itself must have extended beyond mere streets and walls. Their very architecture points skyward, aligning not only with the needs of daily life, but with the movements of the heavens. To climb their ziggurats is to climb into a space where city planning merges with cosmic order. And so, to understand the full meaning of these born complete cities, we must ascend those stairways and ask whether the ziggurats were more than temples, whether they were observatories, engines, or something stranger. At dawn, when the sky is bruised with rose and indigo, the outline of a ziggurat rises from the plain like the stairway of a forgotten giant. These monumental platforms, stacked tier upon tier of mud brick and stone, dominated Sumer's cities. Officially, they were temples, bridges between heaven and earth, homes of the gods. But their form and function suggest something deeper, something that straddles both the sacred and the scientific. The ziggurat of Ur, restored in part by archaeologists, is the most famous example. Its base measures 210 by 150 feet, and its corners align precisely with the cardinal points. Such accuracy is not accidental. It mirrors patterns in Egyptian pyramids and later Mayan temples. Standing at its summit, one has an unobstructed view of the horizon, perfect for tracking the rising and setting of stars. Could these structures have served as observatories, their stairways leading not only upward to heaven, but outward to the heavens? Dr. Margaret Whitney's surveys in the early 2010s confirmed that many ziggurats are oriented to celestial events. Staircases face solstices, corners align with star risings, and proportions encode ratios that reflect astronomical cycles. The ziggurat at Nippur, for example, may have been designed to observe Venus's 8-year cycle, an obsession evident in the Venus tablet of Amisaduqa, copied from older Sumerian records. The very bricks of these structures may have been a calendar, their steps recording the rhythm of sky and season. The association of ziggurats with the heavens also lives in their names. The ziggurat of Babylon was called Etemenanki, meaning house of the foundation of heaven and earth. The very name suggests a cosmic function, a point of union between realms. In Akkadian, the word Zikuratu means to rise high, hinting at both physical height and spiritual ascent. Yet what if this rising was not only symbolic? What if ziggurats were literal instruments for bridging sky and earth, tools for observation, and perhaps for something more? The engineering itself provokes speculation. Ziggurats were constructed with millions of mud bricks, many fired for strength, arranged in layers of decreasing size to form a stepped pyramid. Some contained cavities filled with reeds, bitumen, or different materials, choices that may have had acoustic or resonant properties. Modern researchers experimenting with reconstructions have noted that these materials, when combined, can amplify vibrations or alter sound. Could the ziggurats have been designed to channel not only worship, but energy, natural or otherwise? Ancient texts hint at such possibilities. In hymns, ziggurats are described as shining like the sun, or as mountains of radiance. Their tops are called meeting places for gods descending in fiery chariots. To a modern ear, such descriptions sound like metaphor. Yet they also resemble eyewitness accounts of light, fire, or energy at the summits of these structures. Were they places where rituals produced luminous effects? Or were they stages for technologies no longer understood, remembered as divine? The myth of Enki lends fuel to this fire. He is described as giving humanity the me of building, the me of truth, the me of brightness. Some interpret these as abstract virtues. Others see them as technologies, blueprints encoded in sacred language. Imagine a ziggurat not as a primitive temple, but as a kind of machine, a monument humming with functions forgotten. Echoes of this idea appear worldwide. The pyramids of Giza, aligned with Orion's belt, share the ziggurat's fascination with stars. In Mesoamerica, Mayan temples served both as ritual centers and observatories. At Teotihuacan, the Pyramid of the Sun rests on a cave aligned with solar events, hinting at energy rituals. Across continents, the same motif recurs. Vast stepped monuments rising from earth to sky, fusing geometry, astronomy, and power. There is also the question of ritual. Imagine priests ascending the ziggurat at night, torches in hand, chanting hymns that echoed through the city below. At the summit, they watched for celestial risings, aligning rituals with Venus, the moon, or constellations. The chants, the geometry, the alignment, all combined to create an immersive cosmic experience. For ordinary citizens, the ziggurat was a beacon, a bridge to the divine. For the initiated, it may have been an instrument encoding measurements and rhythms of the cosmos. Some researchers even suggest that ziggurats could have served as early seismographs or weather predictors. Their sheer size and layered design made them sensitive to vibrations. Standing at the summit, one might feel subtle tremors long before others. Their height provided vantage points to track cloud movements, storms, and floods. In a land where rivers could bring both life and destruction, such functions would have been invaluable. And yet, speculation runs further. Were these great platforms also designed to interact with Earth's natural currents, telluric energies, magnetic lines, or resonances we have forgotten how to measure? Ancient builders may have tuned them like instruments, their layers amplifying unseen forces. If so, the ziggurat was both temple and engine, both observatory and machine. Imagine climbing the ziggurat of as twilight descends. The air thins, the wind sharpens. At the summit, priests light fires, and the stars ignite one by one. Below, the city spreads like a dark sea, its people looking upward. For them, the ziggurat is a bridge, a beacon. For us, it may be something more, a monument whose very form encodes a forgotten science. If the ziggurats were instruments, or even engines, then what of the smaller devices, the artifacts described in myth or hidden in clay jars? To glimpse those, we must leave the massive stairways of brick and descend into the archives of anomalies, machines mistaken for magic. In the shadow of Baghdad's old quarter, in 1936, workers uncovered a curious clay jar. Within it lay a copper cylinder and an iron rod, corroded by time. When filled with acidic liquid, vinegar, grape juice, it produced a faint current. To modernize, it resembles nothing less than a primitive battery. Yet this object dates back 2 millennia or more, with roots that some suggest stretch to Sumer itself. Known as the Baghdad Battery, it stands as a reminder that ancient technologies may lurk behind myths, dismissed as ritual or coincidence. In Sumerian texts, the god Enki bestows upon humanity the Me, mysterious items or forces that govern civilization. They include the Me of truth, the Me of kingship, but also the Me of metalworking, the Me of brightness, and the Me of music. Scholars often translate these as abstract qualities. But what if they were tools, devices, technologies described in the language of myth? The Me of brightness could be a lamp. The Emi of music could be an instrument designed to generate resonance. Enki does not simply inspire, he delivers blueprints. The possibility of lost devices gains weight when we look to other cultures. In Egypt, reliefs at the Temple of Hathor in Dendera depict what some interpret as giant bulbs with cables extending to boxes, an image skeptics call symbolic, but which others view as evidence of ancient lighting. In India, Sanskrit texts describe vimanas, flying machines powered by mysterious energies, mercury engines, or crystal drives. In Greece, the Antikythera mechanism, pulled from the sea in 1901, revealed gears so precise they tracked planetary cycles centuries before such craftsmanship was thought possible. Could the Sumerians have possessed their own devices? Machines mistaken for magic, dismantled, or mythologized over time? The Baghdad Battery, if used, might have powered electroplating, medical treatments, or even simple illumination. Cylinder seals show figures holding orb-like objects, glowing in stylized fashion. Were these symbols of divine light, or literal lights? Some researchers speculate that ziggurats themselves might have interacted with smaller artifacts. Imagine clay jars producing electricity, wires hidden in reed channels, and ziggurats amplifying resonance through their layered platforms. Ritual chants may have been more than prayers. They may have been sound experiments, tuned to frequencies that interacted with the structure itself. To untrained eyes, these effects would look miraculous: glowing orbs, humming vibrations, radiant fires of the gods. The myth of the Tablets of Destinies also tempts interpretation. Said to control fates and decree authority, they are often pictured as inscribed clay or stone. But what if they were something else? A kind of device, a repository of coded instructions, a machine mistaken for divine authority? To a later people, without the means to recreate such an object, myth was the only language left to describe it. Even simple artifacts reveal sophistication. Sumerian metallurgy produced bronze alloys of surprising durability. Some ornaments show electroplated layers, hinting at chemical processes not thought possible until much later. Bitumen was used as an adhesive and waterproofing agent, its chemical properties exploited with precision. These are not the inventions of trial and error alone. They look like applied science, guided by accumulated knowledge. Imagine entering a dim Sumerian workshop, the air thick with smoke and the metallic tang of molten bronze. Clay jars line the shelves, some filled with liquid that smells sharp and acrid. A craftsman dips a rod into one and watches sparks leap faintly across the surface. To an outsider, it is sorcery. To him, it is technique, passed down through story and ritual, guarded as sacred knowledge. And yet, when knowledge slips from memory, only the ritual remains. A jar becomes a holy vessel. A bulb-like carving becomes a symbol of divine birth. A gear becomes a star map given by gods. Without context, machines blur into magic, and so myths are born, half memory, half invention, shadows of technologies too fragile to endure. The larger question is how widespread these fragments were. The Baghdad Battery is a single artifact, but what if hundreds once existed, powering lamps in temples or plating metals in workshops? What if the ME were once real devices scattered and lost in floods, remembered only as gifts of gods? The fact that we find even one surviving jar is remarkable. How many others dissolved into earth long ago, leaving only stories to carry their echo? The idea unsettles historians because it challenges the neat separation between myth and science. Yet again and again we find anomalies that resist explanation. Megaliths aligned to solstices, gears beneath the sea, batteries in the ground. Each fragment suggests that what we dismiss as legend may conceal instructions for a technology too fragile to survive catastrophe. Imagine walking through the ruins of Ur at night. The ziggurat looms against the stars. Torches flicker along its stairways. In a temple chamber, a priest places an iron rod into a clay jar, and for a moment, a faint glow sparks. Those watching bow, whispering of gods and fire. But perhaps, just perhaps, what they witnessed was not divine fire at all, but a forgotten science already vanishing into myth. If small devices could be mistaken for sacred objects, then what of the monuments themselves? Across the globe, colossal stones rise in eerie similarity. Stonehenge, the pyramids of Giza, Yonaguni beneath the waves. Could these two be fragments of the same forgotten science, nodes in a global system erased by the flood? To answer, we must step beyond Sumer and trace the pattern across continents, following the trail of megaliths that refuse to be silent. The wind over Salisbury Plain carries the scent of grass and rain, whispering through the stones of Stonehenge. Half a world away, on the Andean plateau, the air thins around the shattered blocks of Puma Punku, some cut with joints so precise that even a razor blade cannot slip between them. Beneath the waters of Yonaguni in Japan, divers glide over terraces and steps carved into submerged bedrock, eerily geometric in form. These sites are scattered across the globe, yet they share a strange kinship. Each rises from stone, each resists the erosion of time, and each hints at a pattern that may once have bound the world together. For Sumer is not alone in its sudden flowering of knowledge. Around the same time its cities rose, megalithic complexes appeared in far-flung regions. Nabta Playa in Egypt, dating back as early as 6000 BCE, presents stone circles aligned to solstices, echoing the astronomical precision of Uruk and Eridu. At Giza, pyramids oriented with uncanny accuracy to the cardinal directions reflect the same obsession with celestial order. In Peru, the fortress of Sacsayhuaman locks massive stones together like a three-dimensional puzzle, defying explanation with Bronze Age tools. The question lingers: are these coincidences of human ingenuity or remnants of a deeper, shared inheritance? Researcher David Hatcher-Childress and others have suggested the idea of a world grid, a network of sacred sites positioned along invisible lines of geomagnetic significance. While mainstream science remains cautious, the alignments are striking. Many megaliths fall along great circles, as if mapped by a hand with global reach. Consider Baalbek in Lebanon, where the trilithon stones weigh over 800 tons each, fitted into a platform whose purpose remains mysterious. The Great Pyramid of Giza, aligned within a fraction of a degree to true north, echoes the same drive for cosmic precision. On Easter Island, the Moai gaze inland, aligned with celestial markers, as if participating in a system larger than themselves. Even Angkor Wat in Cambodia, though built much later, reflects solar alignments so exact that equinoxes light its central towers like a cosmic clock. Different cultures, different times, yet the same language, stone and sky. If Sumer was a restart, perhaps it was not the only one. Perhaps each of these sites represents a node in a larger system, fragments of a lost world shattered by Cataclysm. Survivors scattered across continents, carrying with them memories of architecture, astronomy, and geometry, rebuilding in local stone what once was universal. To the Sumerians, this inheritance crystallized in cities and ziggurats. To others, it became circles, pyramids, and terraces. Even myths echo this global architecture. Polynesian chants speak of marae, sacred stone platforms where sky and earth converge. Celtic lore remembers giants who placed the stones of Britain in patterns of power. In Mesoamerica, the Popol Vuh describes gods raising houses of light aligned with the heavens. Everywhere, stone is the medium. Everywhere, the same motif: align with the sky, endure the earth. Modern science has begun to notice oddities in placement. Studies of ley lines and geodetic alignments, though controversial, suggest that sites separated by oceans fall along consistent longitudes and latitudes. The Giza Plateau, for instance, sits almost exactly 1/3 of the way between the North Pole and the equator. Teotihuacan aligns with a grid that some argue mirrors Orion's belt, just as Giza does. Are these patterns coincidence, or do they hint at a global science of surveying now forgotten? Imagine circling the globe not by airplane, but by following these megalithic beacons. You would trace a path from Stonehenge to Giza, from Baalbek to Ur, from Teotihuacan to Tiahuanaco, until you arrived once more at the cradle of Sumer. The stones would mark your way like stars, each one humming faintly with the same forgotten frequency. Travelers in antiquity, perhaps survivors of floods, may have done the same, navigating by stone instead of constellation, rebuilding the skeleton of a world grid they half remembered. What unites these sites is not only their scale, but their endurance. Clay tablets crumble, papyrus burns, metal rusts, but stone survives. Perhaps this was the logic of the ancients. If you wish to send a message across millennia, carve it into stone and align it with the heavens. That way, even if the language is lost, the sky will still provide the key. The Sumerians may have been heirs to this network, their city's one node among many. But where their neighbours left us stones, the Sumerians left us words, tablets of clay, inscribed with care, meant to endure catastrophe. Yet just as stone circles erode, so too did archives fall silent. Libraries burned, languages faded, and much of this inheritance slipped away. Imagine walking through Stonehenge on a solstice dawn, watching the sun rise perfectly between uprights as it must have thousands of years ago. Now picture a priest in Nippur doing the same atop a ziggurat, eyes fixed on Venus cresting the horizon. Though oceans apart, both participated in the same act, binding heaven to earth, encoding memory in alignment. The world grid of stone is not only archaeology, it is continuity. It suggests that Sumer was not unique, but part of a global impulse to preserve order through monumental design. The stones endure, but the voices that placed them are faint. And so, from enduring stone, we descend into fragile clay, where silence itself becomes a form of testimony. Beneath the shifting sands of Nineveh, in 1853, archaeologist Austen Henry Layard uncovered what seemed at first like rubble, tens of thousands of broken clay fragments. When pieced together, they revealed something astonishing: the Library of Ashurbanipal, a royal archive of over 30,000 tablets inscribed with myths, laws, astronomical records, and medical treatises. Yet what makes this library most remarkable is not what it preserved, but what it almost lost. For when Nineveh burned in 612 BCE, flames swept through its palaces. Papyrus and parchment would have turned to ash. But the Sumerian choice of clay saved them. Fire baked the tablets harder, ensuring their survival for millennia. Accident became preservation. It is a haunting image, knowledge surviving only because catastrophe tempered it. Still, this was but a fraction of what once existed. The Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians together inscribed hundreds of thousands of tablets. Most remain untranslated, locked in museum vaults, silent for lack of time, funding, or expertise. In the British Museum alone, nearly 130,000 tablets lie dormant, their wedge-shaped impressions unread, as if waiting for someone who remembers how to listen. Imagine a library where shelves groan with books no one has ever opened. That is the silence of cuneiform. The silence deepens when we recall what has been destroyed. The Library of Alexandria, said to have housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls, perished in flames centuries later. The archives of Ebla in Syria, discovered in the 1970s, revealed thousands of tablets only to be endangered by war. Every destruction is a double erasure. The words themselves vanish, and the memory of what they contained is gone too. How much of the pre-flood knowledge, if it ever existed, was lost in such fires? Even in Mesopotamia itself, silence is deliberate. Many tablets that survive are fragmentary, their lines broken. Translators must fill the gaps with conjecture. A single missing wedge can alter meaning entirely. Is a line about a god descending or about a storm breaking? The uncertainty becomes a veil, silencing voices we can no longer hear. Yet silence is not only absence, it is also potential. Each untranslated tablet is like a seed in dry soil, waiting for water. Recent advances in imaging, infrared photography, 3D scanning, are beginning to reveal impressions invisible to the naked eye. Artificial intelligence now trains on thousands of tablets, reconstructing missing lines and suggesting translations. In 2022, a project at Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich successfully used neural networks to predict unreadable cuneiform signs. The voices of Sumer are slowly stirring, though still muffled. But how much remains beyond reach? Estimates suggest that only about 10% of extant cuneiform texts have been translated in full. The rest remain in boxes, drawers, or storerooms, silent as stone. It is sobering to think. We know Sumer through fragments, a handful of hymns, myths, and contracts. What if the unstudied 90% contains stories of floods more vivid than Gilgamesh, instructions older than the king list, or even echoes of civilizations erased before Sumer itself? The silence is not confined to Mesopotamia. Across the world, scripts remain undeciphered. The Indus Valley seals, the Rongorongo of Easter Island, the Linear A of Minoan Crete. Each is a mute chorus, fragments of human memory we can no longer understand. Sumer's miracle is that cuneiform can be read at all. Yet even here we hear only partial phrases. The full song is still hidden. Imagine a darkened museum storeroom, rows upon rows of grey tablets resting in drawers. Their marks are tiny, dense, silent. Each one is a voice that has not yet spoken, an idea that has not yet entered our world. To listen would be to recover a fragment of the restart that Sumer represented. But until they are read, they remain like buried seeds, waiting for a flood or a scholar to bring them to life. The Sumerians themselves seemed aware of this fragility. They copied texts again and again, creating multiple versions of myths and hymns. They buried tablets in temple foundations as if planting them for the future. They catalogued collections, listing tablets as though curating a library for readers not yet born. Preservation was not an afterthought, it was the very heart of their project. Perhaps they knew how easily knowledge could vanish, how silence waits at the edge of memory. The silence of the archives is itself a kind of voice. It reminds us that memory is fragile, that knowledge must be actively preserved or it vanishes. And this fragility opens another question. Are the gaps in translation merely accidents of time, or do they also conceal deliberate ambiguities, words whose meanings were meant to remain veiled? To find out, we turn to the uncertainty woven into the very language of Sumer itself. On a clay tablet no larger than a hand, the word Anunnaki appears. To one scholar, it means those of royal blood. To another, those who came down from heaven. To still another, it is a generic term for deities, nothing more. The same wedge-shaped impressions, yet worlds apart in meaning. This is the veil of ambiguity, woven into the Sumerian legacy. Language is not fixed. Over millennia, words shift, fracture, and blur. When scribes pressed their stylus into clay, they assumed the next reader would share their world. We do not, and so we argue across centuries, reconstructing shards of grammar, patching syntax with guesswork. Michael Heiser, a scholar of ancient languages, warned that much of what passes for certainty in translation is illusion. Zecharia Sitchin, by contrast, read the same texts as literal accounts of alien visitation. Between them lies a gulf of interpretation, both sustained by ambiguity. Take the ME. In myth, the god Enki holds them, strange items or forces that embody aspects of civilization. Some translations call them divine decrees, others render them as powers. But the lists of ME include tangible things. Truth, kingship, metalworking, even carpentry. Are these virtues, technologies, or metaphors so ancient we cannot pass them? If one scholar translates ME of brightness as spiritual illumination and another as a physical device that gives light, who is correct? Perhaps both, or neither. Ambiguity extends to numbers. The Sumerian king list assigns reigns of thousands of years to early kings. Historians call them exaggerations. Yet what if the numbers encode astronomical cycles, or dynasties compressed into a single name? A reign of 28,800 years could be the period of a celestial procession, disguised as biography. Without certainty, translation becomes interpretation, and interpretation becomes myth. Even myth itself is slippery. The flood story preserved in Gilgamesh is nearly identical to Atrahasis, yet details shift: the name of the hero, the length of the storm, the fate of the survivors. Each version is both true and untrue, a palimpsest of memory written over by new scribes, each veil thinner than the last. What we read today is not a single story but a chorus of echoes. The veil deepens in seemingly simple words. The Sumerian term dingir is used as a determinative sign before divine names. Scholars translate it as God, yet it also means sky or bright. Is a tablet describing deities or luminous beings or celestial bodies? Another word, Kur, can mean mountain, foreign land, or underworld. Thus a line might say, he descended to the mountain, he travelled to a far land, or he entered the underworld. Each translation reshapes the myth. Ambiguity here is not error, it is structural, baked into the language. Why such slipperiness? Perhaps because the scribes themselves wanted their words to shimmer between meanings. A myth that can be read as poetry, as history, and as instruction manual has greater survival power. It hides knowledge from the unready while revealing it to the initiated. Ambiguity becomes encryption. Consider the tablets of destinies, said to grant supreme authority over gods and men. Are they literal inscribed tablets, symbolic charters of kingship, or artifacts, objects of unknown function, described in the only language available? Scholars debate endlessly, yet the ambiguity itself is telling. It preserves the sense of awe without committing to a single truth. Even across cultures, ambiguity persists. The Greek word daimon once meant a guiding spirit, later mistranslated as demon. The Egyptian necha can be God or principle of nature. When later readers impose rigid categories, subtle meanings vanish. The Sumerian texts are perhaps the earliest victims of this. Our translations flatten multivalent concepts into singular definitions. Imagine holding a tablet in your hands, tracing the grooves with your fingertips. The wedges are sharp, yet the meaning is blurred. The voice is there, but muffled by time. To press the stylus again would be to rewrite, to reinterpret. And so every translation is not recovery, but recreation, a new myth built on old clay. Ambiguity can also be protective. If Sumer was indeed a restart after catastrophe, its scribes may have deliberately encoded memory in language layered like bricks, sturdy but open to multiple readings. To those within the culture, the words carried one resonance. To outsiders, or to us, they carry another. In this way, truths could survive without being obvious, shielded beneath the veil of shifting meaning, and perhaps that was the intention. For if knowledge was dangerous, if it had once led to hubris, collapse, or cosmic punishment, it could only be passed on veiled, never stated outright. Ambiguity becomes both survival and warning. This veil of uncertainty forces us to humility. We cannot declare with certainty who the Anunnaki were or what the ME truly meant, but we can see in the ambiguity a pattern. Knowledge survives not in clarity, but in fragments. Like a broken mirror, each shard reflects part of a face we cannot see whole. And if ambiguity is a veil, then perhaps it is draped for a reason. Beneath it lies a cycle too vast, too unsettling to state plainly, the cycle of civilizations that rise, fall, and rise again. It is to this cycle that we must now turn, tracing the rhythm of time itself. Twilight settles on the desert, and the horizon glows with a faint afterlight, as though the day itself lingers, unwilling to be forgotten. Civilizations too seem to linger in this way, rising, falling, then returning in forms both new and strangely familiar. Sumer may not have been the first. It may have been one of many turns in a vast wheel, a wheel that grinds and renews, erases and restarts. Plato spoke of Atlantis, a great empire swallowed by the sea in a single night and day. To him it was memory preserved by Egyptian priests, passed down across centuries until written into his dialogues. Scholars debate whether it was allegory or fact, but the motif is unmistakable. A civilization extinguished by cataclysm, leaving only fragments. In India, the Yuga cycles describe the ages of the world: golden, silver, bronze, and dark, each lasting thousands of years, repeating endlessly. At the close of each age, destruction comes. Flood, fire, or collapse, clearing the ground for renewal. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs told of 5 suns, each a separate age of the world, ended by jaguars, wind, fire, flood, or earthquake. Survivors carried knowledge into the next sun. The Maya too inscribed cycles in the long count calendar, measuring not centuries but millennia, anticipating resets as part of cosmic order. In Greek mythology, Hesiod wrote of successive races of men, the Golden Age of peace and plenty, the Silver Age of decline, the Bronze Age of warriors, the Age of heroes, and finally the Iron Age, his own era marked by toil and strife. Each age falls replaced by the next, echoing the same pattern: flourishing, collapse, renewal. Archaeology hints that myth may hold memory. Around 12,800 years ago, the Younger Dryas boundary brought abrupt cooling, wildfires, and megafaunal extinctions. Black mats rich in carbon stretch across North America and the Middle East, suggesting a sudden global event. Some scientists link it to a comet impact. Sea levels rose rapidly, drowning coastlines and submerging fertile plains like Doggerland in the North Sea. If advanced societies existed then, their cities would now lie underwater, erased except for whispers in story. Even in later millennia, evidence of resets emerges. Around 2200 BCE, the so-called 2-kilo-year event brought megadroughts across Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley, contributing to collapses. Around 1200 BCE, the Bronze Age world shattered, Mycenaean palaces burned, Hittite cities abandoned, Egypt nearly toppled by the Sea Peoples. The rhythm continues: rise, catastrophe, restart. Each new civilization builds upon the faint ruins of the last, inheriting fragments while forgetting the whole. Sumer's sudden rise after the flood at Shuruppak fits this rhythm. Beneath a layer of silt, modest villages. Above it, cities with writing, law, and monumental architecture. The king list insists that kingship descended from heaven after the deluge, as if authority and knowledge returned all at once. To the Sumerians, they were beginning anew. To us, it looks like a cycle repeating. Imagine civilizations as stars, appearing, flaring brightly, then vanishing, only to be replaced by new constellations drawn by the same sky. The Greeks, the Maya, the Hindus, the Sumerians, they all looked upward and saw not permanence, but rhythm. Each knew that what shines will someday fall, and what has fallen may rise again. The cycle also lingers in architecture. Megalithic sites across the world, from Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge, from Giza to Teotihuacan, encode alignments with solstices and equinoxes. They are not only monuments, they are clocks. Perhaps their builders were less concerned with worship than with warning, marking the rhythm of time, reminding future generations that collapse and renewal are inevitable. For our own age, the implications are sobering. We think of civilization as linear, progress marching ever forward from stone to bronze to steel to silicon. But the ancients spoke otherwise. To them, progress was cyclical, light followed by darkness, darkness broken by new dawn. If they were right, then fragility is our inheritance. Like Sumer, we may be only one catastrophe away from reset. Picture it: a great city of glass and steel falling silent, its lights extinguished by disaster. Survivors gather by firelight, telling stories of an age of wonders now gone. Over generations, those stories become myths. Myths become legends. And one day, centuries later, archaeologists brush dust from ruined skyscrapers and marvel at how suddenly this first civilization appeared. The cycle of civilizations is not just myth, not just geology, it is the heartbeat of human history. Sumer was one pulse in that rhythm, rising not from nothing, but from echoes of what came before. And if cycles are real, then fragility is not failure, but destiny. The ancients left their warnings in myth, stone, and clay. Whether we hear them or repeat their fate remains unresolved. And so we turn now from ancient cycles to our own, our digital age, where knowledge once more risks vanishing, fragile in ways not so different from clay. A modern city hums with light. Screens glow in every window, servers thrum in vast warehouses, satellites beam data across invisible skies. We live, it seems, in an age of permanence, with knowledge encoded in billions of files, replicated endlessly. Yet beneath the hum lies fragility. Our archives, like those of Sumer, are not immune to silence. They are only one catastrophe away from erasure. Consider the difference in medium. The Sumerians pressed their knowledge into clay, heavy and durable. Fire, ironically, preserved it. Flood buried it, but did not destroy it. We inscribe ours in silicon and light, fragile, intangible, vulnerable to power outages, solar flares, or the corrosion of time. A single century without electricity would render most of our archives unreadable. Hard drives decay in decades, magnetic tapes in years. Even the cloud depends on wires and machines that can be silenced. In this, we echo the ancients more than we know. The Nineveh library survived because fire hardened clay. But what of all the papyrus lost to flame, all the scrolls reduced to ash? Our digital world is closer to papyrus than clay, efficient, abundant, but ephemeral. If catastrophe struck, what fragments would remain? Perhaps a few stone monuments, perhaps satellites drifting mute in orbit. Our knowledge might be gone, our myths remembered only in whispers. Modern archaeology mirrors ancient preservation. Projects now use artificial intelligence to translate cuneiform tablets, scanning thousands at a time. But even here, fragility intrudes. What if funding dries up or political winds shift? What if the algorithms that can read the ancients are lost in the noise of collapse? We rely on tools as vulnerable as papyrus, forgetting that clay endures. This reflection casts Sumer in new light. Their sudden emergence with writing, mathematics, and astronomy may not have been invention, but conservation. Survivors encoded what they could on a medium that would last. They chose clay because clay could resist. Perhaps they knew what we have forgotten, that every age must anticipate its own forgetting. Imagine a future archaeologist thousands of years from now brushing sand from a fractured smartphone, its circuits corroded into silence. Imagine their puzzlement at our archives, inaccessible without the power and codes we take for granted. Perhaps, as with Sumer, they will wonder, how did these people rise so suddenly, only to vanish? Perhaps our ruins will tell them little, our myths tell them more. This is not only a thought experiment. In 2015, a massive solar storm narrowly missed Earth, an event scientists say could have crippled power grids for months. In 2021, cyber attacks disrupted pipelines and food supply chains. A century earlier, in 1917, the Halifax explosion destroyed libraries and records in an instant. Catastrophe remains a constant, and memory remains fragile. Where are you listening from tonight, and at what time? The cycle that erased older worlds may not be finished. Sumer's clay reminds us that endurance requires foresight, and foresight requires humility. We may think ourselves immune, but we are not. The same forces that drowned Doggerland, that buried Göbekli Tepe, that silenced Nineveh, still circle overhead. And so we arrive at the final turn of the wheel, the loop of forgotten time, where silence speaks as loudly as stone. Night returns to the Mesopotamian plain. The air cools, and the ruins of Uruk, Eridu, and Nippur lie draped in shadow. The desert wind moves softly, carrying with it not just sand but memory, fragments of voices pressed into clay, stories etched into stone, myths whispered across generations. To walk here is to feel time folding back upon itself, as if the past were not gone, only layered, waiting to be uncovered. We began with the paradox of Sumer, a civilization born complete, with writing, mathematics, astronomy, and cities already mature. No gradual evolution, no hesitant first steps, only sudden brilliance. Beneath this brilliance lay silence, missing layers, erased beginnings, flood silt covering earlier worlds. From Göbekli Tepe to Shuruppak, from flood myths to the king list, From Ziggurats aligned to the stars to ambiguous words like Anunnaki and ME, the pattern repeats: knowledge lost, fragments preserved, civilization reborn. The cycle is everywhere. Atlantis swallowed by the sea, Yugas ending in fire and flood. 5 sons of the Aztecs extinguished one by one. The Younger Dryas etched into geology as carbon-rich soil and sudden ice. Each catastrophe clears the slate, but never fully. Something survives. Stones aligned to solstices, myths of sky teachers, tablets of clay. Sumer perhaps was not a beginning but a restart, the latest turn of the wheel. And we, here and now, are part of that same cycle. Our archives glow in fragile light, our cities pulse with electricity, our memories hover in servers more delicate than papyrus. We believe in permanence, but so did they. What survives may not be what we expect. Perhaps our skyscrapers will collapse to dust, while a single silicon wafer, buried by chance, will confuse a future archaeologist. Perhaps only myths will endure, reshaped until we too become legends of a vanished world. Imagine the silence after catastrophe. No hum of machines, no glow of screens. Only the stars overhead, as steady as they were for the Sumerians. Survivors gather, whispering fragments of old knowledge: how to plant, how to build, how to measure. From those whispers, a new beginning stirs. The wheel turns again. In this way, the loop of forgotten time never ends. Civilizations rise, collapse, and rise again, each leaving traces, each half remembered by the next. Sumer's gift to us is not certainty, but warning. What we have built can vanish, and what vanishes can be reborn. The desert wind sighs across the ruins, carrying grains of sand that sting the skin like memory itself. Listen closely, and you may hear it, the voice of the past reminding us that we too are fragile. And perhaps when our time ends, we will leave behind something small but enduring, a shard of memory for those who come after. If you find these stories intriguing, consider subscribing and share where in the world you are listening from tonight. Are you beneath stars, near oceans, in quiet cities, or drifting towards sleep? The loop remains open, waiting. The silence speaks.